The narrative around Lamar Jackson needs to change.
Lamar Jackson isn't just bad in the postseason. He's historically atrocious.
Obviously, Lamar has been terrible throughout his playoff career if you look at it statistically and if you look at his on-the-field performance. So now everyone expects him to completely flame out in these playoffs. But if you really dig into it, there's a much more systematic problem with the Baltimore Ravens those past few seasons. Of course, Lamar was terrible, but there are really 3 big reasons why the Ravens failed those past few years and 3 reasons why they will succeed this postseason. And it all starts with having better weapons. Look, I'll get into what Ravens fans hate, and that's Greg Roman, but I really think having better weapons and guys who can actually beat man coverage and one-on-one coverage completely revolutionized this Ravens offense. Before these past few seasons, it was really just Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews, and Hollywood Brown. And while on paper, that seems like a pretty good offensive trio, there's some much deeper problems with this. For one, yeah, having a great tight end is really good for a mobile quarterback, especially when they're on the run and need to throw over the middle to a big body target. But you can't really have that tight end be your number 1 threat and number 1 receiver. It only really works when that tight end can get yak like George Kittle or Travis Kelce. And another thing, while Marquise Brown, Hollywood Brown, he's a first-round pick in the draft, and everyone thought of him as a number 1 receiver, but he's not really a true number 1. If you have great options all around the board, Hollywood Brown, he's going to beat you over the top. He's going to make people look silly, but on its own, without really a great complement of receivers around him, he's not going to shine. But it's different this year. You have Zay Flowers, although he's injured right now, OBJ, who's been banged up throughout the season, but still making plays, Isaiah Likely, and even Nelson Aguilar is playing good.
Oh, my man just started throwing babies out the window.
And we was catching them babies, unlike Aguilar. The only problem the Ravens really have right now in terms of receivers is that they don't have that bona fide number 1 go-to guy. But when you have a bunch of above average players playing at their max, it's really a scary offense. But at the end of the day, none of these weapons matter if you can't protect Lamar. And that's something the Ravens have been really good at this year. Look, I had these notes out here about those past playoff games. Did you know that in those playoff games, Lamar Jackson was sacked 19 times? He only played 4 playoff games. And while I'm sure a lot of that also has to do with the fact that a lot of quarterbacks, a lot of mobile quarterbacks, they'll end up running into sacks, a lot of that also has to do with just not playing well on the O-line and just being very predictable. Contrast that to this year, where the Ravens are actually 4th in terms of pressure percentage on dropbacks. Specifically, 15.5%. Now, this could be due to a lot of things. For one, the Ravens, their O-line, they're playing really well, especially in 2 tight end packages. 2, the offensive scheme, which we'll get into later, is a lot more creative, has more defensive linemen guessing. 3, the receivers, they're just getting open, so Lamar Jackson doesn't have to run around for his life, waiting for a guy to get open in man coverage. And 4, and this is where, while I think the offensive line just being better and the scheme has more to do with it, but a lot of this also has to do with Lamar Jackson just being a better decision maker. You gotta understand, it's been 2 seasons since the Ravens last made the playoffs. Lamar Jackson is a different player now. Obviously, these previous 2 seasons, he's struggled with some injuries, but he's still developed as a player. And that's really the last thing we have to go into. Lamar Jackson is just a much better player right now than he was those first 3 seasons. Yes, even that MVP year. Obviously, the stats will not be like they were in 2019. But one area where he's consistently improved throughout his career, and especially this year, is that instead of just automatically running once he leaves the pocket, he stays patient and still tries to find people down the field. And another thing is that he's just in a much better scheme, a much more demanding scheme that actually uses his talent to the fullest. Now, Ravens fans already know this. Greg Roman, he had a lot of problems. Let's be honest here. He was primarily a very run-focused offense, which is totally fine. And while I'm not someone who thinks that running the ball is just completely invaluable, you still have to keep a pretty good balance. Whether you're passing a lot, that's not good, or whether you're running too much, you need to be a balanced offense. And 2, he would use a lot of heavy set packages. And what would happen is that you would load the box so much. And this is Lamar Jackson we're talking about. This is not like Jalen Hurts or Josh Allen where they're these like stronger, bigger quarterbacks that are running the ball. This is Lamar Jackson. You want to make use of his speed. You want to get him in empty space. When you have a bunch of guys in the box, you're just going to get him hit and get him hurt. And one thing I really like is that Todd Monken, who's the new OC here, he likes to spread things out in both the running game and the passing game. And now that the Ravens actually have receivers who can beat one-on-one coverage, it's becoming pretty difficult to defend them. And that's something that they didn't have those previous playoff years. Now, I just have one more thing to say.
I'm trying to die like Bentley today.